All right, let's dive in. Today, we're looking at something called queer theology. Now, this is a field that's all about putting a new lens on some very old traditions. It's about rereading sacred stories and asking what happens when the voices that have been on the margins for so long finally get a central place in our faith communities. It's a fascinating topic, so let's get right into it.
So you hear this term a lot, to queer something. But what does that really mean when you apply it to a field as old and established as theology? Well, it's not just about, adding a few LGBTQIA+ people to the guest list. It's about rethinking the whole party. It's about changing the frame of the picture itself.
And to really get a handle on queer theology, you have to start with its foundation, which is queer theory. It's not just about identity. It's a critical tool, a way of looking at the world that challenges the very boxes we put ourselves and others in. It makes you ask questions like, hey, where did these ideas of man, woman, straight, or gay even come from? Who decided what's normal? And maybe more importantly, who benefits from keeping those definitions so rigid?
I think the theorist, David Halperin, really nails it with this quote. He says, queerness isn't just an identity you have, it's an active position you take. It's about consciously standing just outside of what's considered normal and questioning all those unspoken rules that shape our world. It's a fundamental challenge to the way things are. And that, right there, is what brings us to queer theology. It's about taking that critical questioning lens and aiming it directly at faith, at scripture, at tradition. Theologians doing this work are kind of like archaeologists for stories. They're digging through sacred texts and church history, looking for the hidden figures, the people who didn't fit the mold, and asking us to see our own traditions in a completely new light.
So, where does this re-examination begin? Well, one of the first major ideas in the crosshairs is a concept that has shaped centuries of religious teaching, the idea of a fixed, so-called natural order.
On one side of the coin, you have the traditional view, sometimes called Schöpfungsordnung, or the order of creation. This worldview is very static, very hierarchical, and it's built on a strict male/female binary. But queer theology proposes a different idea, Schöpfungsvielfalt, or the diversity of creation. From this perspective, the divine isn't found in rigid rules, but in the incredible, dynamic, ever-evolving spectrum of life itself.
And the arguments against that old rigid model are really powerful. For one, theologians point out that a strict binary just doesn't line up with biological reality. It completely ignores the existence of intersex people, for example. It also has a tendency to reduce people's worth to whether or not they can have children. And historically, this order has been used to justify excluding people, often turning a message that's supposed to be about love into one of guilt and fear.
Once you start questioning these foundational ideas, it inevitably leads you to the very center of the Christian faith, and that means reimagining the figure of Jesus himself.
Now, just to be clear, this isn't about rewriting the history books. It's more about expanding our spiritual imagination. If the traditional images we have of Jesus have been shaped by very specific cultures, often patriarchal and rigid, what other sides of his story, what other dimensions of who he was might we have missed along the way?
And art, like what you're seeing here, is such a crucial part of this reimagining. Artists are moving away from that distant, kingly, all-powerful image of Christ. Instead, they're emphasizing his empathy, his vulnerability, his deep connection with people on the margins. It's a profound shift, really, from a symbol of power to a symbol of radical solidarity.
Queer theologians also dig deep into Jesus' relationships, and they find a kind of love that just doesn't fit into our neat, conventional boxes. They point to the incredibly intimate language used to describe his bond with the beloved disciple in the Gospel of John. Or they look at the chosen family he formed with Lazarus, Mary, and Martha, a non-traditional household, for sure. Or his healing of the centurion servant, where he helps without any judgment or questions about their relationship. In all these stories, we see a love that is radically inclusive.
And there's a strong theological anchor for this, coming right from Scripture. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Galatians, writes that in the community of Christ, all the social divisions that define our world, like male and female, just fall away. Theologian Patrick Cheng takes that idea and extends it to our time, arguing that if that's true, then our modern binaries, like straight or queer, must also dissolve in this vision of radical equality.
Okay, so that's the theory, that's the theology. But what does all of this actually look like on the ground? How do these big ideas translate into the day-to-day life of a faith community? Well, in pastoral care, it's a total game changer.
It starts with creating spaces that are genuinely safe, where people can show up as their full selves without having to explain or justify who they are. It means practicing trauma-informed care, and that's huge. It's about acknowledging the real harm that religious rejection has caused. And ultimately, it's about moving way beyond just tolerating people to truly celebrating the unique strength and resilience of the LGBTQIA+ community.
And we are seeing this shift happen in big institutional ways. This We Choose Love logo from the Episcopal Church, for example, is a clear public declaration. It's not just a nice feeling. It represents a real commitment to full inclusion in every part of church life, from leadership roles to sacraments. It's about making that welcome tangible and visible for everyone to see.
But faith expression also moves way beyond the church walls. You have artists like Elizabeth Olsen Wallen, who creates these powerful photographs that place queer people right into famous religious scenes, essentially asking who really belongs at the holy table. Then you have activist groups like the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, who use satire and performance art to call out hypocrisy, all while doing serious charity work. They're living out a gospel of what they call universal joy.
So where does all of this go from here? Well, the sources are really clear on this one. Queer theology isn't about creating some new, rigid set of rules. It's about keeping a vital conversation going.
And at the end of the day, that's the core of it. Queer theology doesn't pretend to have all the answers. It's not a destination. What it does offer is an invitation to ask tough questions, to listen to voices that have been silenced, and to join a living, breathing conversation about what faith can be.
And that really leaves us with one last big question. If we accept that faith isn't some static monument, but is instead this living, evolving conversation, then the most important question we can ask is, who gets to speak next? Whose stories, whose experiences will shape what it means to believe in the future? That's really what this whole field of theology is asking us to think about. Thanks so much for joining me.